You know, when you listen to someone talking, possibly even when you're reading, the mind goes on automatic and you're churning on with the listening or the reading, but you're actually not registering any of it. At times, your mind's strongly wandering onto some thought that something's been triggered, and then you come back to the story, and the words are still pattering on, so to speak, and you get the sort of comforting feeling you're still reading it, but actually that there's some continuity, but you actually don't know what the continuity was. If you want the full, well, assuming it is a benefit, of course, if you want the full message, you have to listen to it again, and hopefully you won't be switched off in identical times. But you might be, because there may be something in the text, so to speak, in the speech that does trigger you into this other mindfulness, and you lose again the bit that you missed the first time. So you can listen to a talk or a lecture or read a book many times and still find, wow, I don't really remember thinking about that bit. I wonder if I read it before. I must have done. I read the whole book, you know. Now, in a good way, we think of that with scripture, don't we? Always say, a real scripture is always going to speak to you, no matter how many times you read it before. At times there will still be, my goodness, I've never seen it like that before. How did I miss that when I first read it? And the other 300 times. But it's worth remembering, isn't it? If something is of value to you, go back to it. And go back to it in different circumstances. Do you get the same message? Do you get more? Do you get something different? Do you now see it in a different light? Well, you're only going to do that with something that you felt was of value. It's possible that things you thought were not of value, or in fact actually were harmful, could have some good effect, but you're not going to risk that, are you? Not unless something else happens in your life that causes you to do so. Yeah, but that's not the point. What I am saying is that when you listen to a talk, you miss great chunks of it. And if you find some bit is of significant value to you, well, feel the chances are that there might be more in there that's of significant value, and it's worth another read and possibly another, etc. As you feel led. Bless you. Thank you, Dad. Yeah, you'll also find, you know, that, well, it can affect you different ways when you read it later. Especially a lot later, like you read your writings of 20 years ago. You may find, oh, well, that's not significant to me now. I wonder why I really bothered to write that. That's pretty trivial almost. I mean, I don't know, I wonder why I wrote that. But you can find, and often do, my goodness, did I have those ideas even then? I thought they were more recent than that. It's there, isn't it? Wow. I get that I wrote a book called The Godly Life. I'd write a page only on a particular point that I thought was interesting, like Saint Teresa or something, you know. And I had to get it done in the page, not drone on for, you know, sheet after sheet and rambling. And if I had another point, well, I'd make another page on that point, you know, it's in itself. So I got a whole book of this. I mean, least 300 sides of typed foolscap, each page being dated, and so some dates have 2 or 3 pages, but they're not meant to be on and on the same topic. They are, you've got to get it done in a page and it's complete, you know. And I wrote that back in the 19... I'm not sure if it was in the... Yeah, well, I've been writing since... I think even as a teenager I started then. I think I almost had the notion you could write scripture. I don't think it was formulated quite like that in my mind, but that writing was important, could be important, and I guess I had the feeling that it would help marshal my ideas, you know, organize them into something. And in a sense, a chunk of my life has been in that vein ever since, on and off, of course, as opportunity and encouragement permitted and so forth. So the particular book I wrote, The Godly Life, well, that was probably more in the 80s than the 70s, but still somewhere around there, 1977, say, for argument's sake, onwards. We've covered for ages, you know, years. And as you can tell, if there are only something like 300 or 400 pages, then it didn't necessarily come to me every day. It might be just 1 or 2 a week, or nothing for a month or 2, and then a whole rush of stuff, and so forth. You know, it goes in fullness of time, bits and starts, however you like to think of it. But really quite surprising when I look at it. I got interrupted here, but now coming back, I just want to say how important it is. What used to be the written word, you know, the story of, for instance, the story of Jesus or the guitar, has dramatically changed their world. For East, the Far East especially, I mean, you know, India and so on, the Hindu and the Buddhist scriptures and so on. In the West, the Christian story. Whoever wrote that story profoundly affected the whole unfolding of future history in the world. And I do mean profound. I don't just mean in terms of societal structure and ethics and principles and all that sort of stuff, but in the actual life of individuals whose life was transformed by the story. Now, depending on your view, you might not necessarily think that they were transformed dramatically in quite the right direction, but even so, it's, you know, it's a bit like, if you look at a smaller example, is if you look at something like the writing of Karl Marx. Well, it affected what was the entire communist world in some sense at some time, and the peoples in it, and those outside of it. Just the writings. Now, our technology's changed a bit. We're no longer, you know, using the printing press and all that stuff and the typewriter. We can record speech straight off in the form of speech instead of the written words, which were not quite so fluent, you know. equivalent of the, where are we in? Are we in the 3rd millennium, aren't we? AD, or Common Era, if you want to think of it that way. We're in the year 2000 and something. This 1,000 years, and the next few thousand years, may be profoundly affected by the recorded voice. You won't know that, except in hindsight later on. This is a good prophecy from my point of view to make. You know, the Old Testament view, the Hebrew view, was that if the prophet gets it wrong, you stone him to death. Well, fortunately, I won't be around, so I can make this prophetic utterance without suffering the consequences if I'm wrong. Don't think I am wrong, though. I think we may be passing from the written word to the spoken, recorded word. And I don't know if that will still suffer from the problem of worshipping the writer, worshipping the recording now instead of worshipping the scripture, you know. I mean, you know, all recordings are perfect as opposed to all scripture, right? Google is never wrong. And we all bow down to Google. It's getting close to that, I might point out. Watch your step. Thank you, Dad. Yeah, I should have said YouTube, shouldn't I? What a lot of stuff there is on YouTube. And you've added to it, Marshall. Thank you, Dad.